So excited to see so many people coming in. 2022 has been quite a ride, right? Feels like just yesterday that the Wild team was sitting on Zoom, deciding that we were going to devote an entire year of programming to social determinants of health. It's something we had not done before. It felt new to us, important, and more than a little overwhelming. I mean, what do you say when you hear that as of 2017, only 40% of medical schools in the United States had even incorporated any content on racial health disparities into their curricula? Crazy, right? And alarming findings like this remind us of the urgency with which we need to address, learn about, talk about, act on social determinants of health and health equity. So now we're here at the final virtual learning event of our year. We hope that you, as leaders and team members in and around diabetes and obesity, will leave this event feeling inspired and perhaps even more equipped with tools, whatever your baseline, to address social determinants of health and drive better health outcomes and health equity. As many of you know, I'm Kelly Close, founder and president of Close Concerns. I'm here today to walk you through the schedule for our year-end culminating event on social determinants of health. We'll hear first today from Wild advisor Holly McGarraugh, an advocate for patient access who's worked in leadership positions at companies including LifeScan, TheraSense, Abbott, Gluco. Holly will synthesize some essential messages from our experts during this year of convening on social determinants of health. Next, Dr. Sahar Yousef, a cognitive neuroscientist and lecturer at Berkeley's Haas School of Business, will speak to us about the neuroscience of leading through change. Following these opening talks, there will be an interactive panel discussion on action and social determinants of health, featuring experts in research, clinical care, business, led by Serial Chief Medical Officer and obesity expert extraordinaire, Dr. Barbara Troupin, who spent more than 20 years in leadership positions across healthcare, most recently serving as SVP of Medical Affairs at MyoKardia, which was acquired by Bristol Myers Squibb in 2020 for $13 billion. She's got three trailblazing panelists, Dr. Alice Cheng, Dr. Clare Lee, and Dr. Athena Philis-Tsimikas, who will be introduced by Dr. Troupin herself. And so to begin, join me in welcoming Holly McGarraugh. Holly, take it away.
When I started getting and preparing my talk, I was sitting in my kitchen and I thought back on my career and all of the time sitting in meetings and discussing this important topic of social determinants of health. Well, in fact, as Kelly mentioned, we didn't talk about social determinants of health. In fact, it wasn't even something that was discussed until 2008. And so when we decided to take this on as a learning at Wild for the entire year, it did feel a little overwhelming. It's an enormous topic of interest, of importance. And it was both inspiring and daunting. So it was a year of focus, but we knew that we were on the forefront of something that was terribly important. And we also knew that 10 years from now, we were going to feel good because there weren't going to be a bunch of women that were going to be sitting around saying, so social determinants of health, we really need to get on top of this. We really feel good about such a focus over this year. And so it certainly has been something that's been inspiring for me and given me a great sense of purpose. And with that, there have been three major themes that keep on coming up. Number one, we all have built-in biases. And boy, that's a really tough one because they are deep, they are broad, they're historical in nature, particularly in this country. And we know that there are severe health consequences of these biases. We learned that from Dr. Felicia Hill-Briggs. And we learned about that we saw this incredible review article in Diabetes Care in 2021 in January. We took a very moving tour during ADA of the Whitney plantation, and we heard from one of the descendants of the enslaved people there about what it was like and the impact of being an enslaved person there. Boy, that was an amazing experience. And then we had an opportunity at ADA to get together as a group and talk about that, learn about that. And then we had the author, Dan Pink, who gave us an opportunity to understand that in his book, The Power of Regret, that when we face uncomfortable issues like these biases, these terrible built-in biases that we have, when we face them, it gives us the power to drive positive change. So we all have built-in biases. The next theme that, sort of getting a handle on is that equal opportunity does not mean equity. Well, we've certainly heard about equal opportunity, but equal opportunity is not equity. And this is something that, again, Dr. Felicia Hill-Briggs discussed. And the removal of barriers is really required to achieve real equity. These barriers are disparities in income, education, occupational status, and other social factors that play a role in health. And we learned from Dr. Cody Stanford, who challenged us to even look for systemic barriers where we may not expect them. This is a really a very simple little cartoon that Dr. Felicia Hill-Briggs shared. And this is where you see a very nice example of equality. The three people are on three boxes, it's equal, but you see that only two of the three people can actually see the game. And then you see equity, where everybody can see the game, but then you see when there's an actual root cause barrier removal. And it's that systemic barrier removal that that what we're really driving for. And that was, in fact, what Dr. Cody Stanford challenged us and what Dr. Felicia Hill-Briggs challenged us to see, and there are many examples now in the literature that says this is what we need to be driving for. And of course, it's what we need to be driving for. So the third theme, diversity. So we have built-in biases. Equal opportunity does not mean equity. Diversity is the one that is up to each of us. It takes energy. It takes effort. You're going to hear from our panelists today. You're going to see all of these threads of continuity and examples as we have in our panelists in the past, and our speakers gave such great examples of successes as we have in our learnings. And they will talk today about the successes and examples of diversity in studies and programs. It takes energy, it takes effort to achieve diversity, and we can impact diversity on a personal relationship level. We can do it in our companies, we can do it in our communities. And this is something that it can be done by just asking questions. you can have a real impact on diversity. So it's something that it's not just a feel-good thing. It's something that can drive success. It's something that's smart. It's good for our businesses. So it's one of the reasons that I'm so inspired and on all of these different levels, and for that we can impact our communities. And it's something that by simply being aware, we can impact, we can take these learnings that we've had together and through our panels, our speakers, and our learnings. And we can, in fact, take these learnings and translate them into leadership practice. And so I'd like to take a moment and just say in this week of Thanksgiving, I'd like to give a special thanks to Kelly, to our brilliant speakers throughout the year. They've made a huge impact on me, and it's very inspiring. And our committed sponsors that have been amazing, and the Wild team. And really want to just say thank you for letting this community of learning happen. And we really can make a difference. So thank you. And I really want to thank you for listening. And we have an opportunity to learn today more about how diversity is impacting programs and about the science of learning. And if you've ever heard our Dr. Sahar Yousef, you know you're in for a real treat. So I'm now going to pass over the program to Dr. Sahar Yousef, who's going to teach us about the neuroscience of leading change. And thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Holly. What a warm introduction. What a great way to start today. I am super excited as always to be with you all today. And the topic for today's conversation is going to be the neuroscience of navigating change and uncertainty. Oh my goodness, what an important topic, right? For the past couple of years, but it just doesn't let up. Change seems to just keep on coming. So let's talk about what happens inside of the brain and body when we experience any form of change. Today's overview, I'll be speaking briefly, but I did want to go over the structure, as I always like to do, of what I will be covering in the short amount of time we have. First, I want to cover why humans are biologically resistant to change and why we feel the way that we do when we are experiencing uncertainty and change, and also why we can change. Then we're going to talk about some different studies around mindset and behavioral strategies for actually navigating that change, reducing stress when we're undergoing uncertainty, and making it a little bit easier to handle. And then we'll end with a couple of rapid fire basics. I call them fundamentals of, I just want this to be a checklist of, I need to make sure I'm doing X, Y, and Z when I'm in a state of uncertainty and change. I'll be the first to tell you all, I am currently in my personal and professional life in a bit of change myself. So this is coming at a really phenomenal time for me because I get to remind myself all of the different really important studies and fundamentals. And I'm trying my darndest, I assure you, to also practice what I preach. So let's go ahead and jump in. Kind of curious if anyone wants to throw some guesses in the chat here. Why do you all think we're actually biologically hesitant to change? Alice says change means risk. Right on the money. It's survival. Why are we biologically hesitant? Rewind time a little bit. Change essentially sends a signal to the human brain evolutionarily that, listen, if I have food, water, and shelter and some semblance of safety, if change is happening, that means my security, my safety, and my survival are potentially at risk. So human beings, like most mammals, if anyone has pets, you all know this, they also don't like change. Once they're in a groove and in a routine, they kind of like to stick to that routine, and it causes a bit of anxiety and stress when they're undergoing it. Most of change activates an area of the brain called the amygdala, which is considered to be the fear and anxiety center of the brain. It's about walnut size in the very center. It's a very old I'll say this with much reverence for the entire human brain as someone who studies it, but it's a rudimentary brain area. Really, though, it's not really multifaceted or fancy. It's kind of like a panic alarm. It just kind of goes like, uh-oh, something, fire, uh-oh. And the amygdala does that every single time your routine is thrown off. Something is up, your amygdala starts to fire and go, something is wrong, and I don't like it. Change redirects also, once the amygdala goes off, that panic button goes off, it redirects neural resources. From where? From our frontal cortex, the area of the brain right here behind the forehead, which really, by the way, makes humans human. This is the area of the brain where you're getting executive control and executive function, decision-making skills. This is really the seat of what I would consider to be human rationality. So if you are anxious, this is the chaperone for the rest of the brain to tell the brain, shh, it's okay, calm down. It's just an email. It's not a saber-tooth tiger. It's just an email, and we're going to be fine. It's not what we expected, but we can run with this. So that's the frontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the MPFC to be precise, but really most of the frontal cortex does this. Neural resources, we're talking fundamentally, actually, energy electrically and neurophysiologically is redirected from the frontal cortex, the chaperone, to where? Anterior cingulate cortex, orbitofrontal cortex, the insula, the amygdala, all of these brain areas that go worry, error, panic, oh my goodness. In other words, when we're faced with change, our capacity for rational thought is truly diminished. Dr. Santosh Kesari, he's a neurologist, says from an evolutionary standpoint, we develop neural pathways to adapt to live so that when we encounter change, our brain shifts into a protective mode. Really, from that evolutionary standpoint, if change is good for us or not, it doesn't know if this change is a one-time deal or whether it needs to reestablish a routine. Will it hurt me? A lot of red flags go up. But I want to see in the chat again, we just talked about why would we be hesitant and resistant to change? We talked about survival, but why are we able to change? Anyone want to venture? Because it's possible. So why are we able to change? Yes, survival. It was a slightly trick question, but y'all are very, very smart. So yes, exactly. We are hesitant to change because of survival. I feel my survival is at risk, but we're also able to change because guess what? We got to roll with the punches here and we got to survive. So if things are changing, we got to change along with it. But my disclaimer, please be patient with yourselves. Change takes time. Allow at least, this is bare minimum of every single other box is checked, 6 to 8 weeks to adapt to a new routine and adapt to change. Neurologically, any kind of synaptic plasticity actually starts to kick in around the 6 to 8 week mark in a normal, healthy adult brain. So please be patient with yourselves. Give it time, give it time, give it time. You are not going to adapt to a new routine or some change in your organization, in your personal life in a week. You're not going to say, oh no, it's not what I expected. That's okay. So hard, just push through it. Give yourself a little bit of time and give yourself some patience and grace in addition to your team if you're dealing with professional, of course, adjustments. Now let's dive into mindset and behavioral strategies for reducing stress. I'm going to first talk about something called down regulation. Now the respiratory system and the neurological system have what is considered to be a top down and a bottom up relationship with one another. Top down meaning what's going on in my mind impacts how I'm breathing, but also if I can control the way that I'm breathing, I can impact my mind. It's pretty neat. I don't like to use the term biohack. This is maybe the closest thing to that, but still, generally speaking, not a fan of the term. However, control the way that you breathe. And I'll give you some examples here. You start to breathe like this. This is called upper chest or upper respiratory tract breathing. You're only breathing in, keeping your core tight. Let me see if I can sit up here so y'all can see me. You're keeping your core tight, your diaphragm really, really tight, and you're breathing in here through the mouth. Just in the upper third of your respiratory tract, guess what's going to happen? Body temp will go up, heart rate will go up, anxiety will start to kick in. Because when we breathe in that way, when other times do we breathe in that way? When we ought to be panicking, when I'm running away from something. That is the type of breathing that we do when anxiety and stress is high. Now, how do we breathe, like, for example, when we're sleeping or when we're meditating or when we're relaxing? Low and slow, like how babies breathe when they're laying on their backs and their bellies are going up and down. So if you can mimic the way that you ought to be breathing when you are relaxed, you can essentially override any kind of anxiety that's happening in your mind to trick yourself into becoming relaxed. That's the biohack, so to speak. Now, specifically, I don't want folks to just say, great. Sahar's just reminding us to meditate. Phenomenal. I've heard this a million times, like take a mindful breath. Yeah. Okay. Nuanced point here. There is one type of optimal breathing, not just any type of run of the mill. Oh, let me just take a deep breath. Truly, if you can elongate, ideally double or triple the length of your exhale compared to your inhale. The ratio ought to be 1:2 or 1:3, inhale to exhalation. That's when you actually get the most, so to speak, bang for your buck for down regulation. So again, we're talking about a massive reduction in cortisol within a few seconds. The cortisol, you start to send the signal for cortisol to start to go down by activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And a lot of really great things start to happen just to make sure that what I call, by the way, in situ, that means in the situation, that means in the boardroom, during the meeting when someone has quite frankly pissed you off and you just need to, okay, I'm on mute, so I'm going to take that deep breath. Please count it out for me because not every breath is made the same. Again, elongating the inhale compared to the exhale, 1:2 or 1:3 if you can manage it. Next, externalization, or otherwise what's called cognitive offloading. Externalization is truly just the act of writing out your thoughts, pen to paper, pencil to paper, but with your hand. Typing it does not seem to do as much positive impact for decreasing anxiety and stress during rapid change as does writing with your hand. Nobody knows why. My general hypothesis, evolutionarily, we've been doing this a lot longer than this. Maybe we wait a couple more thousand years and we'll see the same results. But externalization is the habit. And I cannot recommend this enough. When you are undergoing a lot of uncertainty and change, please, please carve out a time right before bed, in the morning when you wake up, and midday if you can. But I understand midday can be very, very difficult. But at least begin your day with what I call a brain dump. That's what I call it. And then end my day. And I do this, by the way, before I enter my bedroom. I don't want to take my anxiety into the bedroom with me. I have a hard enough time sleeping as is. So I do it actually in the living room or at my desk. I dump out everything that's in my mind. And honestly, it's like half to-do list, half random thoughts. I'm circling things. There's arrows everywhere. It's chaotic, but you're just getting the thoughts out. And you're getting the thoughts out before you're winding down. And this will help you tremendously, again, in times of rapid change and uncertainty. Here are some of the benefits of cognitive offloading to reduce stress. Writing out our thoughts actually reduces working memory load. And it's not reducing your memory, it's reducing the load on your memory, which is what you want, because that will allow more memory for you to spare, to actually function, to be in a meeting and to kick butt during that meeting and to remember all the information and the data that you need to carry in that mind of yours. You got to make sure you're not carrying a bunch of extra stuff. So it's the baggage. You got to let the baggage out. Brain dump, brain dump, brain dump, and get that baggage out of your head. It also decreases amygdala activation, which is really, really phenomenal before you go in, let's say, for example, to a negotiation, a stressful meeting, whatever have you. Now, what are called secondary stressors, and that means, by the way, stuff that's in your mind, that's not the primary thing you ought to be focusing in on. Your kid is talking to you and you're still thinking about the meeting you just came out of. That's a secondary stressor. I'm in the meeting and I'm thinking about my kid. That's a secondary stressor. It's just not the primary thing that you're in at the moment. Secondary stressors are just as likely to impair performance because they're unpredictable, harder to control, and unrelated to the task in hand, which means, again, brain dump, right? You got to get the secondary and tertiary things out of your head. Now, people also narrow their field of attention when they're under stress. Why is that important for leaders? You will literally see less options. Someone presents a problem and they say, what do you think, Kelly? Kelly will, under stress, see two options forward. Under lack of stress, if you do the brain dumping, be like, oh, there's 5 things we can do here. There's a lot of different possibilities. We can go at this from a lot of different angles. So we actually are able to see less possibilities for change and for problem solving as leaders when we are under stress. And brain dumping, or what's, again, officially called cognitive offloading or externalization, has been shown to actually help with that. I want to share with you all what the US Navy does to actually train resilience. Believe it or not, there is no magic pill, I wish there was, to increase resilience in the human brain and body. However, I'm going to walk y'all through how the US Navy actually trains resilience with all of the resources that they have available to them. They actually, in this particular study of resilience, testing out what's currently used, they asked recruits to rate their resilience at the beginning of a boot camp and then midway through the boot camp, and then of course tested them at the end as well. Half of them took part in one-on-one peer coaching sessions, guided conversations with their peers, while the other half were left to their own devices. What do they do in these conversations? Asked to share one positive experience, compare your challenges. What's not going well? What kind of issues are coming up for you this past week? And these were, by the way, bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks, they're meeting and having this conversation. And they were dealing with it, imagining their futures as Navy sailors. Those were the 3 things they were asked to do. The recruits who had these conversations saw a highly significant 20% increase in resilience, while the control group saw a change of less than 1%, which is why I highly recommend to every single leader that's here today, every single person that's listening, you got to have some sort of what I call, by the way, a rubber ducky. If anyone has a background in engineering, you might be familiar with this term, but it's a friend, a colleague, a mentor, somebody, anybody. Could be your mother. I don't care who it is, but somebody that they don't have to be in your field. They don't have to understand truly how to solve your problems, but they're going to ask those obvious questions like, oh, Sahar, oh yeah, has something like this occurred for you before? And then they're triggering you to go, about 2 years ago, I kind of did deal with a similar issue. And they go, oh, interesting. Okay. And what did you do then? What worked then? What should we avoid in this situation for you? It's almost like therapy questions, if you know what I mean. It's coaching questions. They don't have to understand what you do. They don't have to understand the ins and outs of what's going on, but they're being a rubber ducky, like in a bathtub. You're talking to the rubber ducky. The rubber ducky's kind of talking back, but not meaningfully. But I assure you, this is truly, truly remarkable what it has been shown to do for retention. So if you all are in a position where you're worried about people leaving your company, create some sort of, and I say this in this safe space, a buddy system, but we can come up with a fancier term for it, but create some sort of mentorship program, have folks get paired up, and then they're having biweekly conversations where, again, the 3 things they're covering: what's going well for you, what's not going well for you, and how can we best, kind of push you in the right direction moving forward? How can we make it easier for you moving forward? Next, I want to talk about some really phenomenal research by Dr. Aaliyah Crum from Stanford University, a wonderful colleague of mine. She studies this concept of stress helps. Now, Dr. Crum studies stress, yes, but she has been able to see in her research that the people that believe that stress is bad actually experience more negative outcomes related to stress than the people that are like, listen, stress is a part of life. It's kind of good for your immune system. It's okay. It's fine. What goes up must come down. It's just a part of the program here. It's, life is messy. It's meant to be messy. What fun chaos. C'est la vie. Those individuals, even when experiencing objectively the same types of issues and experiences that ought to be quote unquote stressful, actually experience less negative outcomes. And what Dr. Crum really pushes is this mindset of stress helps. 3-step process. 1, acknowledge that when you experience stress, by the way, stress is just energy. Stress just means, oh, my heart rate's up, my breathing, I'm a little tight. It's just my body secreting cortisol and adrenaline, these kinds of what are called glucocorticoid stress hormones, to give me the energy to deal with what I need to do. So again, recognizing that stress is a response. It's something I care about. Why are my kids stressing me out so much? Well, it's obviously because I care about them, right? If you didn't care, they wouldn't stress you out. Why is my job stressing me out? It's because you care. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It does mean, though, that your heart's going to bleed a little bit and we need to deal with the stress, but it's not a bad thing to be avoided. Make use of the energy that stress gives you. Crum and her colleagues again found that people who endorse this stress helps mindset report less depression and anxiety and higher levels of energy, work performance, and life satisfaction. Lastly, taking care of your brain, how to accelerate that neuroplasticity, because at the end of the day, neuroplasticity is really what we're hoping for when we are undergoing uncertainty and change. Change just means my environment is changing, the expectations on me are changing, so I need to change and accommodate the stuff that's happening around me. So that means neuroplasticity, or the brain changing, actually needs to take place. Foundational principle here. We already talked about how we need to give it 6 to 8 weeks to even begin, but sleep is the foundation for all of health and performance. If you are not sleeping, how long? 7 to 9 hours of high quality sleep every single night, then we are slightly in the red, and it is even more difficult for our brains and our bodies to actually adapt to that change. We're just adding anxiety to the body that's on top of any type of stress and anxiety that the change is causing, or the uncertainty is causing. Sleep is super important for, again, even at the molecular level, synaptic growth. Sleep loss is associated with detrimental effects on the plasticity process of the brain at even the electrophysiological level. There is something called the glymphatic system, which, for lack of a better term, is the brain's waste management system. It's like garbage trucks that only turn on when we're in NREM, so deep sleep. So when you're deep in sleep, some garbage truck systems turn on and they go around and they actually collect, absorb, and filter out certain types of, they're called toxic protein byproducts, but these are beta amyloid plaques, tau plaques that accumulate throughout the brain when we're awake and using our neurons. So it's a natural process. I know the word toxic can kind of get a bad rap, but it's a natural process. Every human has it, to be expected. But the only time you clean out those plaques and you clean out that metabolic waste is when you're in deep sleep. So if you're not sleeping, you're not clearing out that waste and you're accumulating it. Humble advice, please buy an alarm clock. Don't use your phone. Then it's the last thing you're looking at before you fall asleep, and it's the first thing you see when you wake up in the morning. We don't need that. We don't need that. There are far more important things in your life, like yourself, loved ones. It's better to begin your day with intention and to end your day with intention and a feeling. And I say this with air quotes because I'm just going to say it. Lord knows we're not actually in control of our lives in the universe. However, a feeling of control. If I don't have the device in the bedroom with me, that I know I'm actually off the grid. When I'm in bed, I'm actually off grid. You can't touch me. You can't find me. That time is actually for me. So try to leave devices outside of the bedroom to actually enhance your sleep quality. And then physical exercise, but specifically aerobic exercise, has been shown to be absolutely fundamentally crucial to I don't want to say enhance, but it is technically enhance, but to also support basic neuroplasticity when we're dealing with change and uncertainty. So your brain will actually learn faster and adapt faster and more efficiently if you're doing aerobic exercise. Studies suggest that exercise plays that really phenomenal role in the neurons that form in the hippocampus related to memory, but can also prevent neuron loss. So you're actually holding on to all the precious, let's call it brain mojo, that all of us absolutely need. But again, it's not all forms of exercise, it's aerobic. I'll be honest, my least favorite type of exercise, but as a scientist, I'm here to just report. I'm here to report the facts, everybody. But I'll be honest with you, I do not like aerobic exercise. And lastly, making sure that your brain has the right fuel. If I were to recommend the first recommendation, please make sure you're doing an audit of the amount of omega-3s that you're getting. Why is this so wildly important? Wildly important. Hey, wild. Make sure that you're getting enough omega-3s because we do not, in fact, we don't make our omega-3 fatty acids internally, endogenously. You do need to acquire them from your diet. So unless you're having a diet that's super, super rich in omega-3s, and it doesn't, if you're vegan or vegetarian, there are many, many vegan and vegetarian supplemental options for omega-3 fatty acids. But some new studies have been able to show that up to 2 grams, which by the way, is sometimes double or triple the recommended dose on the back label. So check your back label out. Up to 2 grams of EPA and DHA, which are the fundamental components of a good omega-3 fatty acid, support brain health when you're undergoing stress. So if I'm under stress, I'm cranking up my omega-3s. I'm also cranking up specifically magnesium. Magnesium threonate passes the blood-brain barrier a heck of a lot easier than some of the other forms of magnesium, like citrate, oxide. Magnesium glycinate is also phenomenal, but this one is really, really great, specifically if you are taking the magnesium for brain health and not for sleep, in which case I recommend magnesium glycinate, and 500 milligrams a night will be really, really phenomenal, just to making sure your body and your brain have the building blocks you might need to support you during times of rapid change and uncertainty. And with that, here's my email address for those that might have questions that are personal that you wanted to reach out with. And as always, thank you all for having me. I love this group so much. You all are amazing, amazing individuals doing such awesome work in the world. And it means the world to me that I get to jump in sometimes and help support with some tips, what I can offer. So thank you all. And with that, thank you. And with that, I wanted to hand it over. Let me pull this up briefly and let me make sure that I'm stopping my screen share so I can make sure that we're going in to the right next piece here. And if possible, I'd like to hand it over and welcome to the stage the incredible Dr. Barbara Troupin, who will be leading today's panel discussion on action and social determinants of health. So Dr. Troupin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Yousef. I was scratching. I know you're supposed to write by pen, so I have a whole page and a half of notes from your talk. So thank you. Got to start working on those items. So thank you, Kelly, for your great intro. Holly, for your recap, which brought a year of learnings into focus for us. And Sahar, your keynote help us figure out how to take these learnings forward. Integrate them into our leadership style. It's all very exciting. However, the most exciting thing that I get to do is help you hear from these 3 amazing leaders. I'm going to ask each of the 3 pictures you see here to do a brief self-introduction And I'm going to ask each of them also to share with you a proudest moment of impact related to social determinants of health. And that's an action, initiative, or learning related to social determinants of health that they would like to share. And it'll help us start seeing there's so many different ways that we can have an impact and have that impact become part of our leadership style. And because I want everyone to leave the session with a whole toolbox full of ways that we can address social determinants of health, I'm going to ask each of you that's participating to also enter in the chat your proudest moment of impact. You don't need to see them start scrolling by. Don't worry about that, because we've got a whole team of people that are going to be looking at what comments you put in the chat, and they'll get summarized and put as part of the recap afterwards. So go ahead and put those in, and there will be a few other times during the panel that I'm going to ask you to share as well. So I'm going to briefly share, my brief introduction that Kelly already covered, but 20 plus years in industry, but also practice and research, touched many of these areas and thought about these issues quite a bit. And to share my particular proudest moment of impact. And this is something that I've taken on even more so in the last couple of years, and it's just great to watch the impact of just reaching out and becoming a mentor and a coach. So for me, it's having a diverse team. You've heard other folks talk about the diversity on our team changes how we think and strengthens our activities. So I think this is a huge one. You want that diversity representing our patients, representing the communities that we serve, a team that sees and understands these challenges, and their varied perspectives help us better address barriers and burdens. And I've made a conscious effort to seek out individuals, both in my organizations, but in community and my outside of work activities, and seek out individuals from high school all the way through boards of director level folks to be able to mentor, coach, provide opportunities and experiences, and help them ascend in the roles, extend and succeed in their roles, so that they have greater visibility, greater impact, that their voice really can make a difference in the teams which they participate in their communities. So that's mine. And then I'm going to ask for each of our panelists to do a brief introduction and be able to share your proudest moment. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Alice Cheng.
So thank you very much, Barbara. This is a real pleasure for me to be here and to share within this group. And I very much thank Kelly and the rest of the Close Concerns team for this opportunity. So I'm Alice Cheng. I'm an endocrinologist that is from Toronto, Canada. And I've been involved in diabetes, of course, and of course in endocrinology for 2 decades now, I guess it's been, and I've been involved in a number of guideline development, et cetera. And one of my big passions is medical education. And you'll hear more about some of the things that I've been trying to do to help in that. But to answer the question about the proudest moment, relevant to that topic of medical education, one of my passions is trying to improve the diversity and inclusion within medical education that's delivered at the conferences, be it national, local, regional, international, et cetera. And the proudest moment was when I had a very senior mentor who I have known for decades and would be one of the usual suspects, if you will, one of the usual people who speak at every conference and is very much well respected and sort of an older white male. And for him to actually text me one day and say, Alice, I thought about you the other day and I did the right thing and I hope you'll be proud of me, but he was invited to speak at an event and he thought twice about whether this was the best choice for him and whether there were opportunities he could offer other people, and he did. And he reached out and he suggested someone else who could potentially take his place, someone who was more junior, someone who would have enjoyed the opportunity. And I was so proud of him. Like, if you could see me, I would have been crying. So it was a wonderful thing to have felt that he heard, and he was happy with what he had done as well. So I thought that was a very proud moment.
That's fantastic. I love that. An introduction from Dr. Athena Philis-Tsimikas. And I'm going to move to first names after this, but we'll give you the whole intro to start.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. And I echo what Alice has said. I want to thank Kelly and Close Concerns and this entire group that has really made an effort around this incredibly important topic for the whole past year. So thank you for the invitation. I am an adult endocrinologist, similar to Alice. I live in San Diego, California, and I'm part of the Scripps Health System and the Scripps Whittier Diabetes Institute. And reflecting back on maybe my proudest moment, it probably has to do with the development of a community program called Project Dulce. And maybe I can just set the setting a little bit for you. Scripps Health, and where I practiced when I first started over 25 years ago now, is set on the Torrey Pines Mesa above the Torrey Pines Golf Course, where many a PGA Tour have been played, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's absolutely beautiful, and it serves a population that probably doesn't experience many of the things that we will be talking about today. During those early years when I was there, San Diego conducted a community health needs assessment, and it recognized that one of the greatest needs in healthcare was delivering diabetes care, and that our underserved population was not getting the care they needed for diabetes. And the county and the federal qualified health centers reached out and said, hey, Athena, as an expert around diabetes, can you help us build a program that can help boost the care to these patients? And we did this collaboratively as a team. We pulled in academics from San Diego State, we pulled in county members, we pulled in community members, as well as providers from the federally qualified community health centers, and really built this program called Project Dulce. The idea was to really deliver better care side by side with providers that are out there in the trenches every day. We did receive a really wonderful grant opportunity to kick us off at over $2.5 million from the California Endowment at the time, and it really kicked off an amazing program. I'll be talking more about that, but that really has been one of my proudest moments in terms of care and delivery of care for diabetes.
Fantastic. And as somebody that did a family medicine residency that often went through in San Diego, that often went through the community clinics, I got to see this as well. So excited to meet the person that came, that built it from the beginning. And next, if we want to go to Dr. Clare Lee, please.
Thank you, Barbara. And I want to echo my thanks to this panel, as well as Close Concerns, Kelly Close's wonderful team, and the audience for this opportunity to reflect together on such an important topic. I'm based in Indianapolis. I'm a clinical research physician, executive medical director at Eli Lilly. And reflecting back on how personal this topic is, I go back to my childhood, growing up, humble background, working immigrant family, and father being diagnosed with type 2 in high school really left an impression and sort of became sort of a guiding post for my career. Side note, he still doesn't take any medical advice from me, but that's a different story. And prior to joining Lilly, I had a privilege of serving the community in Baltimore as an endocrinologist, nearly a decade. And I learned so much from my patients, as well as distinguished colleagues from Johns Hopkins, about the social determinants of health, how critical it was for recognition of this matter that serves as a barrier, unfortunately, for our patients. And so I'm just really happy to be here to further reflect together on this topic. Your question about the proudest moment. More recently, I was a medical lead for a clinical trial study design that was focused on type 2 diabetes in adolescents. And it was very clear, the disproportionate impact of type 2 in the underserved communities when it comes to youth affected by type 2. So with that in mind, I'm proud to reflect on the hard work that the team has put forward to make sure the clinical trial that we designed really met the needs of the diverse communities, that we lower the barriers for patients of all walks of life to be able to join the study and complete the study, and really limiting the amount of data that we collect to the absolute minimum, so that again we make it easier to reach a diverse community. So those were some of my fondest moments.
Well, thank you for sharing your proudest moments. I know we aren't always great about championing our own successes, but it's actually a great way to demonstrate the learnings and help to inspire folks. So I would encourage people, and I'm not watching the chat, but I'm seeing bits of it scroll by, so I can't wait to see everybody else's proudest moments as we do the debrief and see the recap. So Holly did a great job of laying out for us 3 main themes. And so that's how I'm going to start with the panel structure. And so let's start with that first theme, the one that is deep-rooted obstacles and barriers exist within us, our infrastructures and our systems. So as we start our discussion on social determinants of health and health equity, and we've talked a little bit about this. If you want to add another example of a personal moment or experience that inspired your commitment to social determinants of health and health equity. And this is occasionally that aha moment of where it really just became obvious how these barriers were hurting our patients and our communities. So perhaps it's another example, if you can add to that, that would be fantastic. And we'll start with Alice. Is there something else that you sort of think of as it just became so obvious I couldn't not jump in?
So I think when we're talking about the delivery of healthcare at the area that I work in Mississauga, which is just outside Toronto, a very diverse, from an ethnic perspective, population, but also from a socioeconomic piece, because I also spend time downtown Toronto, inner city Toronto. And it became very apparent in my training that the kind of care, we think we're delivering the same kind of care to everybody. And we pride ourselves in doing that, but we're actually not, because there's many barriers that we end up setting up. Just the fact that I run clinic from this hour to this hour, from this day to this day, is in and of itself a systemic barrier on a very practical level that impacts the ability for some people to be able to actually come to the clinic and be able to seek the care that they need. So I feel like even just there from a very practical clinic-based day-to-day health delivery, there are things that we're doing which is a significant barrier for people. And I got to say, the pandemic in some ways has altered that by allowing for virtual care to take place, which I feel may have torn down some, certainly not all, but some of the very barriers that we're talking about for health delivery.
Great, thank you. Claire, are you able to share potentially a moment of inspiration? We did hear some at the beginning, but if you can think of another.
Well, yeah, just back to that topic of just sitting together in a team and just thinking through how to come up with the best clinical trial study design. One topic that was put on our desk was to consider sort of what Alice was getting at, sort of creative solutions, right, to make things more approachable. So, for example, decentralized clinical trials is a topic that can potentially really give us that upper hand when it comes to providing some additional flexibilities, whether it is telehealth, study visits, or going to your local lab instead of coming for an in-clinic visits. I think we get the idea about some of the solutions that this topic would allow us to think about. And what was interesting one time, thinking about it, it's all about the context and the patients in front of you, right? So in our case, in our specific case of thinking about youth with type 2, it was a more delicate subject to think about offering creative solutions like this decentralized, clinical trial approach. What we've learned through consultations with our external and internal experts was that not everybody is open to having other people come into their home for, say, nursing, home visit. Not everyone is open to, let's say, seeing a different provider at different visits. That there are, maybe different contexts, maybe different disease space, or maybe different populations that would be more amenable to sort of pulling in these types of creative solutions. But clearly, one solution does not fit all. So we have to be actually really mindful of what we are getting at if we think about these creative solutions, and making sure that these things actually fit and serve the needs of the very population that we're trying to serve. So that was an interesting learning from my perspective. Again, thinking about each potential solution and the impact for your specific population that you have in mind. And so we ended up not doing that route, but doesn't mean that it was right or wrong. It's just at the time that we looked at the solution, didn't think that it was the best fit, but we did end up having, being able to come up with solutions in which we, had phone visits with in-person visits, and maybe the number of visits were reduced again to that bare minimum so we can get the job done, but reduce the burden.
And I think the pandemic provided us a few opportunities where we may have felt more constraints to lower some of those barriers. So I hope some of those opportunities to be creative don't slip away from us, and we can hold on to them. Athena.
Yeah, I mean, I think reflecting again back on the experience I've had in the community, probably education, the way we deliver education for me was the most eye-opening. A lot of times I'll walk into the office and I'm the endocrinologist that has a lot of experience, and I'm going to tell that patient, hey, here's what we're thinking about, and maybe think that that's going to be impactful. And in creating this program, my eyes were open to a different way to teach and educate patients in the community using peer educators, promotoras, community health workers. They're all different words for the same thing or similar things. And I thought to myself, when someone presented this concept, and this was over 20 years ago when peer educators were not around at that time, it was not the common thing. We had to figure out, how do you even do this in an environment? And I thought, I spent 15, 20 years of my life just training to be able to give this kind of education and information. How can someone that sometimes doesn't have more than a 6th grade education level deliver this message? And we created a curriculum, and we trained these peer educators. They were people with diabetes themselves that went into a room and had this amazing impact in dispelling myths, in sharing important information about how to take better care of your diabetes, how to advocate for yourself and go tell your physician, I don't think this is right for me, or this isn't working, or I feel this, and there's something I should be doing about it. And I was amazed that they did just an incredible job. We ended up getting NIH funding to do studies of this, and found that the outcomes of hemoglobin A1C were impactful. It lowered A1C much better than usual care. So it demonstrated to me that our entire approach to how we think about education and training and delivering a message to our patients that we take care of is incredibly important, and we have to really use the right approaches and meet them where it makes sense for them as well. So, and that's been translated in the education materials that we create then thereafter, making sure it's at the right level. All these other things that we know are important, in the right language, takes into account the right cultural approaches. We even translated our curriculum into text messaging when people couldn't come in for live messages. Could they just get their messages on the phone? So that was probably one of the most eye-opening experiences for me.
Fantastic. And Alice, it looks like you have something else to add.
So I think if we go back to the initial question of sort of inspiration and where that comes from, I actually think a lot of inspiration comes can come from discomfort. That often discomfort is what then, well, makes you uncomfortable and makes you anxious and makes you perhaps angry. And then from that, you can draw something positive, which would then inspire you to perhaps want to create some sort of change, right? So whether that's when we're dealing with patients in our clinic and we're seeing some sort of thing that's making us uncomfortable or angry, or they're feeding back to us something that they're not getting that they need to get, or back to medical education, which has been my passion, just realizing over the years that no one else looked like me on the stages. Obviously, that's all changed now, but they're changing, I should say. It hasn't all changed, but realizing this discomfort and this sense of it's not fair. So it can be born from a quote unquote negative emotion, but then it's what you do with it. It's what you take from that and then try to create in order to make the change. Because you could just forever just be upset, or you could say, okay, this is upsetting, and now let's see what we can do to change it.
No, that's a great point. And so there's the discomfort of it. And then I think another piece is sort of like to shift gears to is sort of the magnitude of some of these barriers. I mean, these are some big problems to solve, as previous speakers have spoken. And how do you look at a problem that seems daunting and start breaking it down? Find that first place to start having an impact. And each of you have addressed big challenges. So I would love, maybe that moment of like, okay, I'm just going to hold my breath and get past that first big step. Where do you start? So what does it look like to take the first step? And I'll start with Athena.
I'm just going to take off a little bit more on what Alice says about discomfort, because peer educators for me was sort of that first level of discomfort and then acceptance, and then, whoo, wow, what they can do. The next level that I noticed was in the community clinic setting with the providers. And we asked nurses that are experts in diabetes to leave the education side and become much more of medical managers side by side with the providers. They almost challenged them, because there were truly many times when they knew more about what should be done than our providers that were there, because of their experience in taking care of these patients for so long. And they ended up challenging those providers to raise the bar and learn more. And they really were learning side by side together. They were training together. And by the end of the first or second year, you could see that bar had been raised so high on the provider side as well because of that challenge. So really allowing people to work at the top of their scope, I think, is one of the other learnings that I had. Allow them to do that, and then allow them to be trainers and teachers to others around them.
I love that. I just wrote the allowing people to work at the top of their scope down. That should be a good takeaway for all of us. Alice, thoughts on how do you break down some of these challenges and make that first positive step?
So I want to go back to the lecture that we just heard, the rubber ducky. I feel like step one is talk to your rubber ducky, and I know I did, right? So as the frustration was building, as I was attending different medical education things and just feeling like, where is everybody? Like, why am I the only perhaps person of color on this stage, et cetera? And so then you start bouncing it off your rubber duckies. And if you're lucky, you have more than one rubber ducky. And it's this conversation of, first of all, am I justified to feel this way? Because we tend to self-doubt a lot, right? Oh, maybe I'm just overreacting. So being able to bounce that off your rubber ducky to say, actually, no, you know what, this is real. I've noticed this too, and other people have noticed it. I think there's that's step one, is having a supportive person who is listening and then reflects back and sort of validates that which you are feeling. Then it becomes, at least for me, you go into sort of strategic mode and try to figure out who are the stakeholders in this, who are the key people that I need to talk to, and actually who are the key people who will oppose it. because I feel like we almost need to start there. Who are going to be the key objectors to whatever idea you have, and start the conversation with them. Now, hopefully these objectors are people that you have relationships with to some extent, and you actually start with them, because you're bringing them into the fold. Here is the issue. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And it's so powerful to hear what potential objectors will say to help you build whatever strategy you may have, so that they actually feel like they're part of the solution from the beginning. So that was one thing that I found incredibly helpful. But number one, rubber duckies, so that you feel validated and okay, this is appropriate. And then I would actually reach out to the people who you think would actually object the most and have that conversation.
So let me ask a kind of clarifying question on that. I mean, many of us are in team meetings or cross-functional group meetings with different folks with different backgrounds, and are we starting these conversations about, this is uncomfortable or overwhelming, or, are we having those conversations or modeling those conversations in our team meetings?
It's a great point. And maybe we should, right? But at the same time, we need to be aware of the dynamics of the group, and how often should some of those conversations be initially one-on-one. Because you also need to create a safe place for the objector. So in the specific example for me, it's around diversity, inclusion in medical education. So you can imagine that people who object to that would feel very unsafe to object to that, because it's not cool to object to that. But yet they do. And I need to get to what that core is. So I need to do that in a safe place, where they know that I'm not going to judge them and think, oh, you're a terrible person for having said that. But it's actually, can you help me understand what somebody else might say if they were objecting to this, which is sort of another way to get them to actually say what it might be. And I feel like that's a very powerful way to hear the truth, or else you end up just arguing. And you're just butting heads, and there's no actual thing. So yes, I think modeling that behavior is important, but knowing your audience, because sometimes it may not be a safe place to be putting it out in a group.
Can I add one other approach that I've learned over the last few years as part of, I'm the Director of Community Engagement for our Clinical Translational Science Award that is based at Scripps Research. And I had to learn what community engaged research means. And community-based participatory research means. And that's where you get the opinion and the voice of the community in the hypothesis that you are creating as a researcher. You involve the community members in the design, the implementation, and then the dissemination of the message and the results afterwards. Something that as researchers, many times, we aren't comfortable doing. I had to train researchers around me that it's okay to do this. And I had been doing community-based research for many years, and I still didn't quite get how involved that community member should be in order to, so that the most important messages to the community are what are researched in the long run. And then you can offer them solutions, not the solutions of the researcher, but the solutions that the community needs. And I'd be curious to know if Claire has any thoughts around or comments around the way you're approaching research that involves the community as well. It has become a huge issue throughout the NIH in terms of conducting research with this approach.
Yeah, thanks, Athena, for looping me in there. What was interesting for me is that as I got in, deeper into sort of, doing the best we can on the clinical trial team standpoint, to keep in mind the important mission of, making sure that we do research that reflects the faces of the population that we're serving. I got to actually learn more about the initiatives that's within Lilly, and some teams have done, different things, others have done one things. And so while I don't have a concrete example from my team within, with regard to your question about community sort of resources and partnerships, I got to learn some really cool examples through oncology group that they're doing exactly that they're engaging with community, groups and patient advocacy groups to really have sort of grassroots efforts to figure out first what the patient-based groups are looking for, what kind of solutions they're looking for, how can we sort of find solutions that really stick and really speak to the community. And so I think those things are well, well in place. And I think we need to do more of that, and which is why I'm humbled to kind of learn those examples through my colleagues in my company, but I don't have any examples per se from personal experience within the team that I operate in. But I think going back to this overall theme, what I did get to experience within on my desk was really engaging the very external experts and the physicians and site PIs that really have, in-depth knowledge about serving the underserved community, and having their voices be heard, and asking them the question, does it make sense? We do the trial this way or that way. We're doing procedures this way or that way, approaching things that way or this way. And getting those feedbacks from the people that have, sort of relationships, working relationship with the patient population we're targeting, has been really humbling and also really insightful and helpful for us to make sure that we are doing it, doing good by our patients and not creating protocols that are sort of removed from the realities, making, again, this is a win-win when we have trials that ultimately lead to breakthrough outcomes. We want those results to be generalizable. It is essential, right, for what we do in drug development. And what better way to do this sort of intentional efforts to partner with our external partners than to do it all, way up in, in the beginning and not later on as an afterthought, but this has to be very much intentional. And so that's been my growing learning about thinking about this rather uncomfortable topic, but it is such an important topic, and putting it front and center instead of sort of, later on.
And I think that's been sort of one of my learnings as well. Well, as a development physician is, your commercial team might be doing mapping a patient journey, or as you are going through and in later stages, you might be there might be a patient-focused drug development meeting at FDA where you're really listening, but often that stuff is happening pretty late in the process. And so you're hearing from patients what is most relevant, and, families and caregivers and community providers, you're hearing stuff that you just think, well, that would have been really good to hear when I was designing my phase 2, not as I'm writing up my phase 3. And so the how do we push that even earlier in the process is a great thought. And as we think about like, how do we make change, that's how do we push those things earlier so that we can incorporate all of those learnings. I think it's fantastic. So one of the second theme that Holly had mentioned is equal is not the same as equitable. And how do you focus on addressing and removing barriers? So we go beyond just equity. And what does that look like? And so, I think that's, and I'm particularly interested in learning from Clare as well, because, there's this tension in running clinical trials that you want to sort of implement everything as same as possible. You're not introducing any biases but how do you get everybody to the same playing field so that you're measuring the same thing? So would love to hear any thoughts on, if you have communities that are coming from different places, how do you get them to the same place to start looking at outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. And I want to acknowledge kind of the big picture first, because to your point, I think the root cause, right, kind of looking back at that picture from Dr. Hillebrand, the root causes are multiple, right, as to why, for example, type 2 diabetes impacts disproportionately the underrepresented communities. There's biological, there's environmental, there's genetics. I mean, there are different causes to it, right? So while I don't want us to feel overwhelmed by the multiple causes, I think we can all agree that we can pick sort of different specific angles that we can target from our own capacities. And I guess that's where, my work on behalf of the team is coming in to look at, potential biological targets, right, that you can then use as drug development and help the patient population. And to that, so I just want to first recognize that there are multiples, but what we're getting at from our angle is one of the solutions, right? And the fact that from our sort of angle, removing the barriers involve making eligibility criteria reasonable, so that you're not making it so difficult and complicated to the point of having sort of underrepresented communities sort of get really give up, or they just may not be able to meet everything. Is that necessary, absolutely necessary to make it complicated, or can you simplify it to the bare minimum that would allow you to achieve your goals, right? So that's one idea. I mentioned about site PIs and how important it is that to have that partnership of ideally having your research partners, physicians looking like the patients, that would be ideal. But we all know that, you're looking at the demographics of medical schools, unfortunately, we still have that inequality, right? But again, being mindful of site PIs that have firsthand knowledge in serving the communities and what the needs are. I think that's one easy and very powerful solutions we've employed to making sure that our recruitment, at the end of the day, our participants are going to come from a variety of different walks of life. And also another thing we've done is thinking about patient-facing material. And I think Athena can appreciate this, right? Just making sure that the health literacy and the friendliness of our material that that's involved in the clinical trial implementation makes sense to our participants, right? And making sure we use the right language and again, materials that are just appropriate for our population. And all these things are sort of small efforts that hopefully add up to reducing the barriers and making sure we recruit patients that we ultimately want to serve.
No, those are all great examples. And Athena or Alice, if you have, how do you think about communities where you have differential or disproportionate actions to address more than health equity? If you have an example relevant, we're happy to hear those as well.
So maybe I'll jump in here with, maybe it's not so much health equity, but back in that idea of the medical education space is, even though being able to provide medical education, we're already a privileged group, so to speak. Within that group, there are different groups. There are those who have been fortunate enough to be in an academic center, have had a mentor who's very prominent. And then there are many who have not had that, who have had not had opportunities to learn how to speak well, how to create programs, how to do that. So I think another important part in trying to create solutions is also trying to, it would almost be like making the boxes in that picture that was given, where then people could stand up on the boxes to see the game. So creating a platform where anybody and everybody could sign up so that you can find speakers when you need speakers. And it doesn't matter if you've been endorsed by somebody or somebody famous knows you or doesn't know you, it doesn't matter. You're at least on the same page in that sense, providing programs to help people get better at speaking and developing programs and sort of trying to level the playing field in that sense. So it's not so much healthcare we're speaking about, but it's still the same concept of realizing that within one group, there are still differences within the group. And to identify the groups that could use some help to try to make it more, make it more equitable if possible. And I think it's important to identify that even within what looks like a homogeneous group, there can be quite some differences.
Yeah, Barbara, can I add one other thing to this too? I'm just thinking from both sides what Alice has spoken about with if we could get more trainers, educators, providers that are coming from the communities that are at risk, that they're thinking about things in a different way. And the example I think about is, I think I mentioned we created a text messaging program for that replicated our curriculum. It was offered in English and Spanish initially, and allowed the patients, and we heard from the community first that this is what they wanted. They wanted not an app that has to be put on a smartphone that might require increased knowledge on how to use the app, and you have to maybe have certain charges. So we did create it as a text messaging program, something that everybody in every community knows how to use. So that was sort of our community voice input in how we created it. But what I'm thinking about also is we didn't think about the next steps of where to take this until we had a Filipino researcher, a young woman that was working with us, and an Egyptian Arabic speaking investigator. And they both had heard community-based approaches to research. And they said, you know what? This is a huge need in our communities. No one is providing the education in these languages and in a culturally appropriate way. They took it upon themselves. They actually volunteered to translate everything into Tagalog and Arabic. We worked with the platform designers, and we now created and replicated, and they're in the middle of testing it at this point. And it was their enthusiasm and their recognition that there was a gap in that care that allowed them to take that next step. So again, I feel like hearing from the community, whether it's the community of the physicians, the researchers, or the community voice that's out there, the members, our patients, all of those are important when we have to take those next steps in achieving that equity.
Great examples. I'm sitting here scribbling as we go, and then realize that we've got, another 80 people on the platform as well. So I'm going to go ahead and encourage, as you are hearing solutions and ideas for your toolkit, go ahead and drop those in the chat as well. Again, they'll be integrated into the post-meeting notes, because let's learn from this wild community of all the other things that we can be doing as well. So I'm going to encourage folks to keep the chat bars rolling. So the other theme, the third theme that Holly had focused on is the effort is needed. And I think we've touched on this several times here, as this takes a lot of thought and a lot of energy and a lot of collaboration to address some of these barriers. So I'm for some of the speakers, I had some ideas that I sent. I'm going to take moderators' prerogative and jump forward, because I think there are some things that we've covered, but some things that I would love to keep hearing about. So, we've talked about relationships with the community and how critical it is to listen, hear, integrate. Maybe each of you could share a challenge, like where you thought that building a collaboration was going to be smooth or easy, or a conversation would go well and it didn't, and maybe some learnings from building some of those relationships. I think would be great, because we've just heard how important they are. Those initial builds don't always work smoothly. I think Athena gave us one nice example, but are there things that went really well that you'd love to model, or things that did not go the way you wanted, that may be examples for the audience? And I'm happy to have anybody jump in on this one.
I can jump in.
Okay, thanks, Claire.
I like to reflect on sort of my experience as I was learning more and more about diabetes in adolescents. I also saw sort of science converge, with my own interest in, this curiosity of wanting to learn about the heterogeneity of diabetes. And diabetes in someone is, might be different than somebody from, who got it as a young onset versus later onset. And really having this conversation, within my colleagues, medical colleagues in my company, gave me an opportunity to, again, sort of explore this curiosity that we have to challenge ourselves about the status quo and moving the field in the directions that hopefully is a win for the patients. And at the same time, it just happens that that population that I am focused on is also, unfortunately, again, disproportionately impacting the underserved community. So I felt, in a way, a bit lucky to have those two things kind of converge in ways where, from my desk, I am, constantly thinking about ways to challenge ourselves and pursue science and make innovations, and being able to champion on behalf of this sort of what I think is almost like a subtopic, right, within diabetes, meaning It's almost like a phenotype that exists that really deserves extra attention. Clinical trials tend to be mean age of 50, right? I mean, there are different, you know, that you get those over and over, and perhaps we're missing an opportunity in a more aggressive disease and younger onset. So from my standpoint, I've kind of conveniently sort of converged my curiosity in science that also has a big impact that is both ways, right? Causal in terms of that social determinants of health being an integral root cause of the young onset type 2, but also there's room for us to understand better, enhance scientific understanding, and generate evidence to support pursuing this phenotype that, you know, to me speaks greatly about, again, the heterogeneity of diabetes, how we're always learning. And by learning more about this subgroup, we'll hopefully be able to make better improvements for this population that also, you know, again, brings us constantly to the social determinants of health as one important aspect of understanding this subgroup.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that integration. Athena, you have your hand up.
I wanted to just comment on the fact of one of the things I learned, being careful not to abuse the trust of the community that we have gained because we have delivered a service that has helped them. And what I'm thinking about this in is we realized that there's not a lot of genetic work around looking at some of that heterogeneity that Claire was talking about. Especially, I live on the US-Mexican border. Within the Hispanic community, there is a huge amount of heterogeneity in there. And we had a young researcher who wanted to go in and do some genetic analyses in the population so that she could begin to offer and potentially provide more solutions for the future, or even to describe it, because it hadn't even been described up front. And we went in and we said, this is what we'd like. And we realized that the community members were willing to say, yes, I will do this. I will give you a vial of blood or saliva, because they trusted us. And then we realized, oh no, we shouldn't be doing that. They don't really understand what we're asking them for. It is our obligation to create a training, an education, something to let them know what this all means first in a way that they can understand it, and then ask them, now that you understand this, now, if you'd like to participate and provide us with a sample, please do. We'd like to learn more. We think it will be of benefit, but we had to stop and think about that process before we could actually move ahead and do it. And that for me was a huge eye opener, and like, oh my gosh, we can't just go blindly into this without thinking about it very, very closely ahead of time.
Which is actually a great segue to, unfortunately, we've got 5 minutes left. So I've got one last question. But what does success look like and how do we measure it? So I'll give you, this is sort of the lightning round of like, how should we be thinking about what is success and how do we measure it? And why don't I start with Alice, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to share.
So I'll just focus on my little area, the passion of mine, which was the medical education piece. So one of the solutions that I created was something called the Med Ed Pledge. And the idea behind it was that to empower all stakeholders, avoiding the shaming and blaming, not pointing the finger at anybody who's maybe lacking in the diversity and inclusion, but making it everybody's responsibility. And I encourage everyone listening to this, they could go online and look at themededpledge.com. And it's a personal commitment that you're going to play your role in helping with this. So what would success look like? I mean, on a very basic level, it'd be looking at, okay, how many people signed the pledge? But that's really not the point. Because even if somebody looks at the pledge, but doesn't sign the pledge, but then does something about it and thinks about it and is deliberate in their choices in the future, that alone is success. So I don't have any metrics to show you, but I think just observationally, looking at least in my region and those that I have conversations with, things are changing. Things are slowly changing, and you're seeing different faces on the stages. And frankly, that mentor calling me or texting me and saying that, you know, he did something different, that alone was huge. So I think successes can be very small, but impactful, and then they can grow from there.
Okay, fantastic. Athena, what does success look like? How should we be measuring it?
Oh my goodness. For me, success would be if we could deliver, whether it's education, devices, care, to all with sort of a blind eye to everything else, and ensure that that someone gets for their diabetes everything they need. But I think to get there, one of the things that we really need is to be able to ensure we can gather all the data so we can identify who is it that isn't getting this. That's how we identified in the first place that there was a needs as, in the diabetes population. And I noticed that Kelly put in the comments, for the Asian community, we don't even break down what is Asian, and yet there's like 5, 6, and even more categories. And that could be done for so many different things. So one thing just recently, Health Equity Information Center, this was just set up in our institution to really be able to allow anybody to dig down and see what kind of information do we have, identify where the gaps are, and then you can start putting some solutions in place there. So
Fantastic. I love it.
yeah, gathering the data.
And Claire.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about sort of short-term versus long-term like success goals, right? So short-term for me would be, having clinical trials with diversity representing, that of the disease that you're focused. And long-term is, again, becoming a solution, for serving that community better to improve their lives.
Fantastic. Well, and in the last moment, I mean, what an honor to facilitate these panelists. That's amazing. I've learned a ton, and I've been so inspired. So thank you to each of our panelists for participating today. Thank you, Kelly, for asking me to be moderator. It was amazing. I really appreciated the experience. So back to you.
Oh, wow. That was just such a compelling conversation that we just get to sit in on and hear from people in chat. Barbara, I mean, the density of goodness here was profound. And, hearing about discomfort from Alice and hearing about different ways of thinking about trials, Claire, and thinking about Athena, how things are reported out. It feels like there are bunches of different ways in which better thinking can really drive some good here. I hope everybody is inspired as I am to go out and to really commit at least one thing that we'll do to be actively mindful about social determinants of health in particular. So thank you so much, everyone, today for speaking. Sahar, of course, wonderful to hear from you and your advice to us about what to do differently, even if maybe especially if we think we're already doing it. Barbara, you helped us really move into what is daunting. And like I said before, your moderation and speaking has helped us so incredibly much. The panelists, Alice and Claire and Athena, again, just thanking you all for your superpowers, and to our wild advisor, Holly, who was the first champion of close concerns 20 years ago for everything that you helped us understand at the very beginning about going back and seeing our learning about social determinants of health from the very start of the year. So thank you hugely much to our sponsors, Abbott, Insulet, and Novo Nordisk for making WILD possible. Your support really is providing emerging and established women leaders and all of our allies the opportunity to become more educated and more connected. So you can see more at our website, closeconcerns.com/wild, and on our YouTube channel. The link is going to be sent out to all of you. And even before that, we'll put out a survey to you. So thank you in advance for filling that out. And, just thank you for joining us for our final virtual learning event of the year. For those of you who are really into technology and or those of you who are in Chicago, we also wanted to let you know there's going to be an amazing meeting. As many of you know, ADCES is doing another very super hands-on tech conference. We all know that time and range, as we think about it, is such a gateway, and we're going to learn more about that in Chicago. But if you're going to be there, or if you're in and around Chicago on December 8th, we're putting together a reception. It's going to be at Chicago's Landmark Field Museum, where you can connect over. We'll have hors d'oeuvres, drinks, and as part of our sort of last piece on the year-long focus of social determinants of health, we get to go to the new permanent exhibit at the Field Museum. This is a permanent exhibit on Native Americans, Native Alaskans. That's called Native Truths. That spotlights diverse Native stories and the people who share them through words, music, dance, and art. And this is going to be, it's really instructive as we think of a particular population that maybe a lot of us don't know as much about, and also who has really borne the negatives of diabetes and obesity, particularly disproportionately. The other piece is on that Sunday morning, we can go see the arrival of spring Normandy. That's 5 minutes away from the conference. That's from an exhibit on David Hockney that literally is very, I think, beautiful, and it'll be a good way for many of us to end our years. We'll send it out virtually as well. I know when I saw Native Truths a couple of weeks ago, that felt like it made me 100% smarter and more educated about this important population. If you're interested, you can register for that in the link in chat. Again, thank you hugely, Abbott, Insulet, and Novo Nordisk for being the source of goodness here. We hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for coming in. We know it's Thanksgiving week for those of us in the US, but we wish you happy holidays, and we'll be sure to get the link out so you can share it. So thank you so much again to our wonderful team at Close Concerns.